Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
You've got the operating principles, which is how you're behaving. And then from a people perspective, what's some of the traits? How are you finding talent? How are you assessing these individuals? What makes a great hire to you?
So, to some extent, it depends on the position, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're a small organization, not so small anymore. We're coming up on, I guess, 400 people now in the organization.
Wow.
But we're still pretty small, and we don't tend to bring in a lot of entry-level people. So, we're looking generally for very deep skills to match a particular, need, right? And that's going to vary from function to function. But there is definitely a cultural fit element that we look for. We look for people who are nice, because that's the obverse of the asshole principle. Is you're looking for nice people. Right? It only takes one to really ruin the well. But I think the other thing that we continue to look for, and is a challenge, I think, in recruiting, is people who are comfortable with risk and people who can innovate. Risk is inherent to the pharmaceutical business, the biopharmaceutical business, right? And it's particularly risky in a smaller organization like Arcutis. I came from Eli Lilly and Amgen, and there were risks, but the lights were never going to go off, right? They had these wonderful. And this was pre-GLP-1s. They had these wonderful assets that just produced money that, kept everything going. There was a period where we weren't sure Arcutis was going to make it. We had less than 12 months of cash. The stock was like $2 a share, and we were staring into the abyss. And some people just can't handle that kind of risk.
Right.
And so people sometimes will select out. We've even had people who joined and then said, you know what? I got kids and a mortgage. I'm not sure I can handle this. And I'm going back to the big corporations, and that's just fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that risk taking is important, and the innovation is really important. What I found in working large organizations, and there's lots of good things about large organizations, right? They do lots of things that don't make a lot of sense. Right. And then you ask them, well, why do you guys do that? And they say, well, that's just how it's done here. Okay, that's never the right answer. Anyone who says that has admitted defeat.
Yeah.
Off the bat. We really encourage people to question things. Why do we do this? Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
Could we do this a different, better way? And I think that culture of innovation and risk-taking has really allowed us to be successful, because we're always looking at how we get better.
Yeah.
And
right.
We don't have the luxury of resting on our laurels.
It's really interesting that you mentioned those two things, because inherently, I find, at least in my experience, that there's so many people in our industry that are quite risk averse. And as you say, that when they come from large organizations, it is the stock answer of, oh, it's always been done like that here. And to heart, I know a lot of organizations will say, okay, we want people who take risks and are entrepreneurial, but then a lot of these organizations don't actually do it, don't walk the walk, right? And so How do you find those, when you're assessing these individuals for those traits, how do you actually assess them? Is it something you can do pre-selection? Or
I think, to a degree, look, I think, again, if you're not hiring entry-level people, you are a result of your past experiences, right? And so someone who is comfortable with risk and someone who's really good at innovating is going to have done it in the past, right? If you've never done it before, I can guarantee you're not going to be comfortable with it, or almost guaranteed. And so, in the interviewing process, I think most folks who have done it will demonstrate, they'll have examples of these behaviors. But also, I think some of it is us being very upfront with people about our expectations and what they're getting themselves into. Some people, even in the interview process, are like, I'm not really sure that this is the right thing for me, right? I think the other component to this, and I, oddly enough, was just talking about this with the team. I send out a message every Monday to the team, every employee, whatever happens to be in Frank's bonnet on Monday mornings. And a couple of weeks ago, I sent one out about risk taking, right? And, I think one of the keys to being good at taking risks and innovating is being comfortable with failure, being comfortable with mistakes, right? Because if you're not making mistakes, you're not taking risks.
And you're not learning.
Hear it, right? Innovation is because you're trying something new or doing something different, and that's not always going to work. right? And this is one of the things I talk about with the team a lot, that no one's going to get fired here for making a mistake, right? At least a well-intentioned mistake, right? If you're being lazy or sloppy or not doing your job, that's a different conversation, right? But if you say, hey, I want to try this a different way, and you try it and it doesn't work out, okay, well, we know that didn't work, right?
Yeah.
But you really have to create an environment where people feel comfortable taking risks. And one of the ways I think that we also accomplish that is this whole concept of Marquet's idea of intent-based leadership, right? Because, if Ted works for me and Ted comes into my office one day and says, Frank, we could run trial A or trial B, but we're going to run trial A and here's why. Okay, Ted just made that decision.
Right.
And then I say, okay, that sounds good. I've evaluated and endorsed that decision. If it hits the fan and we should have done the other study, it's not all on Ted. It's also on me, right?
Right.
Because I endorsed the decision. I didn't make it, but I endorsed it. And that creates some psychological safety for Ted to be able to lean in and make those decisions and take some risks, right? So, I think you really have to rethink how you operate if you want to foster a culture of innovation and risk-taking.
Yeah, I love that. And I also, something that really resonated, Frank, what you said around when you're speaking to people at the start is like being brutally honest with them. I can't remember who it was who went to, I think it was the North Pole or South Pole, and they put an ad out there and they basically said, listen, this job is not for everyone. You may die, you may, go hungry, but like you attract the right people as a result of having the right conversation, right? Rather than just saying we need a bum on the seats in order to make this thing work, which,
right.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is the U.S. Marine Corps, right? Or the Royal Marines, SAS, right? You know what you're getting into, right? They're not going to sugarcoat it.
That's right.
It's so true.
So if you were to think about the most junior person in the company and they've started there and they've been working there for 6 months, what would they go home and tell their family and friends about what Arcutis is like?
I think that they would say that it's a very mission-driven organization. It's a very ethical organization, and it's a fun place to work. It's 24 hours in the day, right? You're sleeping, hopefully 8. I'm an 8-hour-a-day guy.
Yep.
So you get 16 hours to work with. It's an hour commute in, an hour commute home, or if you're in LA, like I am today, it's even longer than that. And you're going to spend 8 hours or so at work. You're spending half or more of your awake life at work, right? You want to be somewhere where people have fun and they like the people that they work with.
Right.
And again, this is something we lean in very hard on to create an environment where people feel valued, but also people are having fun and they like the people they work with, right? Because I think you create the right environment and people will be committed, they'll be motivated, they work hard, they give you good results. And I think one of the other things for me is when the company's successful, everyone should be successful, right? So I give equity to every employee in the company. As we just gave out equity awards a few weeks ago. We pay people well, we give them good benefits, we give them a cash bonus, but we also give them stock because when the company does well, the employees should do well. I don't understand why leaders don't do that because there should be alignment of shareholder interests, the company's interest, and the employee's interests.
Yeah.
So how do you manage as CEO of this company? It's very busy, growing. How do you manage on the personal side, not just thinking about this all the time? Or do you think about it 24/7?
I don't think about it 24/7 for sure. I think it helps having a really good team.
Yep.
Ted, I know a lot of the team, they're just great at their jobs and I trust them, right? So I don't need to micromanage a really great performing team like we have here. I do think that work-personal balance is an important thing. Burnout is real.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge really with work-personal balance is you can't prescribe what that looks like, right? And so we have policies here at the company that try and ensure people have the ability to strike a work-personal balance, but give them flexibility to tailor it to what they want. For example, we don't have set work hours at the company.
Right.
We are a truly remote company, always have been and always will be. My direct reports, 5 of the 7 of them don't live in Los Angeles. Some of the staff work in the mornings and the evenings and they take the afternoons off. Some of them work 7 days a week, but they may not work 8 hours a day. It doesn't really matter to me. It's about trying to articulate your work and your personal life in a way that fits with what you need. We really focus not on the inputs, but on the outputs. Did you deliver what you said you were going to deliver? Great. We don't care when, where, how long it took you, right?
Yeah.
We provide unlimited paid time off to our employees. And we've never had a problem with an employee abusing that.